Hi, my name is Adam Key, and I will be reviewing Chris Houtson's paper entitled Chris Kluwe's Lustful Letter, justifying an examination of a profane letter in defense of marriage equality and free speech. Now, if you were paying attention at all during the last election season, particularly to issues involving gay marriage, which was on the ballot in several states, you probably remember Chris Kluwe's letter. If you're like me, you probably didn't remember by the author's name, but definitely by the content, which was shocking to say the least.
Are you Chris Kluwe, the plumber?
I'm not a plumber, I'm a punter. Who are you guys?
We're the government. We'll ask the questions. Did you call an elected official a lustful cock monster?
No, I said he wouldn't turn into a lustful monster if gay people could get married.
You can't go around calling elected officials lustful monsters.
Actually, I can. This is America.
The content itself was particularly obscene, and that's part of why Mr. Outson writes about it, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But particularly, that's what made it memorable. In fact, as an academic, I never once imagined that I would be using terms like lustful cock monster or mind-fucking obscenely hypocritical in an academic review, but here we are. So, when looking at this paper, I want to just take a moment to look at the standards that the professor laid out for us as far as what would make a good paper. Now, according to the syllabus, quote, the text must be both manageable, simple enough, and bounded enough to make it suitable for criticism within the confines of our course, and rich enough, deep enough, and complicated enough to be approached from different perspectives. In both these instances, I definitely believe Mr. Outson has picked a suitable text. It's definitely manageable. It's definitely a simple enough concept. He lays out his points, he even numbers them in the actual letter Mr. Kluwe does. And bounded enough because essentially this is not some 100 or 300 page document. This is a simple letter written to an editor and posted all over the place. I want to say the entire thing is only about basically a page or so of text, maybe a couple more if you double space it. So it's definitely bounded enough, and as well as it only focuses on certain areas, that being really free speech as well as, of course, gay marriage, which is why it was written in the first place. And rich enough, deep and complicated enough to be approached from different perspectives. Even though this letter contains more cursing than the average episode of The Osbournes, what we can see is that it definitely has very, much like an onion, very many layers that we can analyze from very different perspectives. He talks about a variety of issues, as well as makes arguments, and of course there's the classic obscenity that's okay as well as his background as, a professional football player. Now, according to the overview lecture, we are given several criteria for what would make a good text. It must be symbolic, it must use words and language to be good, should be printed, persuasive and non-literary, and not a performance. Those were the things given for being best. It should be a single work, not a corpus. It should be short, but not too short. It should be famous and well-known, but not well-studied. And should be influential, but underappreciated. So let's go through these one by one. First, in order for anything to be considered text, it has to be symbolic. It has to be something that stands for something else. Well, of course, this text is absolutely that. The text itself takes, the letter itself and stands for a couple things. It takes a stand for both free speech, it takes a stand for gay marriage, and also, as Mr. Outson addresses, the idea that people who are professional athletes do have an ability to comment publicly on issues without being lambasted by elected officials. So, to the next criteria, words and language. Well, it obviously meets that. It is a printed letter. It's a letter he sent out, which meets the first two categories, words and language, and printed. It's persuasive. It's definitely written in a very persuasive tone, as Mr. Outson notes. Even Rush Limbaugh, who was staunchly opposed to Mr. Kluwe's point of view, actually comments and says, well, this is definitely, he has a way with words, so it's clearly persuasive. It's not literary. And it's definitely not really a performance. This is not, a sense of an acting type of thing. This is Kluwe's actual opinion. He's not getting out there. He's not playing a character. This is not a script written for him. He definitely wrote the letter himself. Now, a single work, not a corpus. This gets a little gray area because Mr. Outson not only talks about the letter, but also talks about its expanses and to use this for Minnesotans for Equality, T-shirts, and, has several other things. So hopefully we're going to, he'll just stick with the idea of it being a single work, being the letter, and maybe using a couple of those things to supplement, but using the letter as the primary thing and not as a collection. So if he does that, clearly it meets the standard of a single work. Short, but not too short. Now, I'm a big fan of shorter works, especially from a rhetorical perspective. This one, it's short, but it's poignant. It's essentially taking like a long argument and concentrating it down. And that's exactly what Cluey did, because the average reader who's going to read something I read in the Huffington Post, and these other online people that posted, is probably not going to read 500 pages or even 10 pages of a letter. So he really boils it down to the main issues. So it's definitely short enough to be analyzed, but it's not too short because he has several different issues he brings up, talking about free speech, talking about freedom of religion, talking about gay marriage, talking about the ability of the athletes to comment on things. And, of course, a lot of cursing sprinkled in as well. Famous and well-known. Well, that would really depend. If you're politically minded, you probably heard about this. Honestly, when I first read about this, it took me a minute to remember when this happened, because there were so many things going on in that election season. Even just if you want to isolate down to gay marriage, there were a lot of things going on. And I remember this as being kind of a blip, something Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert made brief mention of, but I didn't remember it getting as much press as Mr. Outzen has seemingly found with it. That's not to say it didn't. It's just to say that, maybe this was something people joked about. I don't know that this is particularly, one of super famous things. Clearly in Minnesota was famous, as he was a Minnesota Viking. And, within the state of Minnesota, seemingly they use these phrases over and over. And I know he apparently made it on Ellen, searching on YouTube and everything. But, largely, this was kind of a one-hit wonder thing, I think, for the guy. But it's definitely not well studied. So at least people, are going to be familiar. It'll have one of those, oh yeah moments where they're going to remember what this is. But I don't know if this is, famous on the same level as some other things. Not to say that it's not worthy of study, I'm going by the criteria. Influential, but underappreciated. Yeah, this definitely meets that. This is something that, operates on a variety of levels, and is definitely not as appreciated as it probably should be. Like I said, it's kind of saying something should be famous, but also saying should be underappreciated, seemingly kind of contradicts, because if it's really famous, you would assume it's kind of appreciated, but this is the type of thing where it's kind of a diamond in the rough, and definitely worthy of some rhetorical study. So, Mr. Outzen breaks down in his defense of three primary issues. One, looking at a poignant issue, something that people were talking about. And gay marriage is definitely that. Gay marriage is something that's on the mind and hearts of a lot of people. There are a lot of people on the left and the right who have very strong opinions about whether or not homosexual people or bisexual, who are just really not heterosexuals, should be able to enjoy the same rights of marriage and that heterosexual people have. People compare it to civil rights struggles. People compare it to lots of different things. So this is definitely a poignant issue, as he talks about, and the fact that it's currently going on within the political sphere. We're still having debates over in my inbox. I sign up to subscriptions, for email newsletters from both the right and the left, and both people or sides are sending me stuff. Everything from the ACLU to Liberty Counsel to all these people back and forth. And gay marriage is definitely something that's been talked about. So, just from the fact that it's right in the fray and it jumped in there makes it worthy of rhetorical study. I'm going to agree with Mr. Outzen there. The second thing, this idea of profanity. The profanity definitely adds an interesting flavor to it, and I appreciate, the fact when you're looking at a piece where profanity is the primary reason where it got noticed, that Mr. Outzen does not censor it. He, gives the paragraph that people may be offended, but I think being offended by it was kind of the point. It's what was the shock value to let people get out there. And so the profanity definitely is a unique vehicle. It's got some unique rhetorical qualities and things that are definitely good to analyze. And then changing images of athletes. This one, I think, is kind of a stretch, because essentially I realize this was kind of Cluey's point to say, hey, not everyone meets that dumb jock stereotype, which we've all heard of. However, I don't know that this really changes the image of athletes in general so much as the public's image of Cluey. And if you want to approach it from that standpoint, he's kind of becoming the exception that proves the rule. I don't know that there's, really a lot of rhetorical ground to analyze here, only because I don't think it's really having as much of an effect as Mr. Outzen is claiming. Now, as the professor had instructed us, I did actually email him a couple questions, and I want to discuss what I asked him and his responses to those very briefly. So, let me try to pull that back up here. All right. First thing I asked him was about the idea of changing the perception of athletes, which was a big point, which something I just talked about. And I asked him, was he interested in looking at the idea of using crass language and how that may affect whether or not people actually had views changed, because we expect the dumb jock stereotype to curse and use language like he actually did here. We expect that from celebrities, we expect that from the Osbournes, but no one really thinks Ozzy is, a political genius. So, he basically said that people aren't really noticing that. Rush Limbaugh said that, but I think that area is worth a little more study, the idea of, is the cursing itself, because, I think it made it a little more acceptable to come from a professional athlete, which really goes against this point of changing their images, because if, I don't know, Barack Obama or Nancy Pelosi had written such a letter and used words like lustful cock monster, I think they would have been a lot more sharply criticized, but we accept that from a guy who's a punter on a football team rather than an elected representative. The second thing I talked to him about, he does not mention the paper in Cooley's letter. He makes what I do believe is a slight against the Russian people. He talks to the congressman from Maryland he's writing to and says, the Russian judge would give you extra points for oppression. Now, this, I don't know if this is necessarily racist, but it's definitely prejudiced against the Russian culture. And it strikes me as a little bit hypocritical to sit there and argue for the rights of gay people and, you shouldn't be oppressing the rights of minorities, and then take a pot shot at another culture. Now, Mr. Outzen responds by saying that he doesn't believe it's a slight against the Russian people because he believes it's a slight against the history of the Russian people and, I would assume the USSR. That actually is kind of my point. It's still a slight against their culture. It's essentially saying, hey, Russians are the type of people who oppress. As well as he says, well, they're kind of anti-gay and they find Lady Gaga $50,000. Again, that is basically taking one example of a culture, one part of a culture, and trying to apply it to everything. Again, if he had made the same type of crack about people from Mexico or Nigeria or whatever else, it's the same thing. You're still being culturally insensitive at the least and prejudiced at the most. And it seems kind of an odd fit to take a jab at the Russian people when he's defending, the rights of everyone to be equal. And the third thing, I thought would be interesting is the idea of essentially, was it really the fact that he cursed that got him noticed, or was it the fact that he was a celebrity? And if, Joe Sixpack, or an average person, or even someone like us, academics, if we'd written this profanity letter, if we'd sent the same letter in, would it have even been published, or would the editor have dismissed it as just being some crackpot? So I find it interesting, essentially, that he's using basically a bully pulpit. He's well known became well known, from this letter, but he was well known in the first place and publishable because he was a punter on an NFL team. So what we see from that is another unique angle I do believe can be explored: the idea of simply celebrities using their celebrity status, using their position in the media to enact social issues, and that definitely could cross by people like Bono or Lady Gaga who do the exact same thing. I mean, this is definitely an athlete, one of the first ones doing it, but that's definitely an interesting thing from a rhetorical angle. So, wrapping things up now. When we look at this, when we look at the criteria, I definitely think Chris Outzen did a very good job here. He identified something that's interesting, and I definitely appreciate people who have kind of a gutsy approach to what they're doing. People who, take the path less traveled and will look at a cursing football player and find those bits of rhetorical gold within it. I believe he's definitely met the criteria, and I look forward to reading more things. And hopefully, maybe he'll take my advice, maybe not, as far as those other areas to look at. The crack on the Russians, the use of celebrity, and, maybe how, we were more accepting of his rhetorical use of cursing because he was an athlete. For all these reasons, just taken together, I'm very impressed by this paper and look forward to seeing more of it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next time we have a video review.